All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the fourth session of CBI. My name is Maggie, and I'm just going to do a quick review session before I hand it over to our first presenter of the day. And as per usual, we're going to go over what we've learned so far, and as well as some discussion questions for you to keep in mind as we go into today's session. So far we've learned the role that advisory groups can play in bringing community input to our projects. We've learned that a good leader empowers group members while keeping their discussion and work focused on the mission or primary goals. Today we're going to learn strategies for developing a good strategic plan to guide your work. Something to think about as we go into today's session is what roles can an advisory group play when establishing a vision, mission, and strategic plan. So our campus connection for today regards institutional resources, and our example is a little bit closer to home for us people in Montana. Salish Kootenai College convenes tribal language experts and educators in Montana for an early childhood tribal language summit to make progress on important goals of language preservation. They're able to use their institutional connections and capacity to gather together people and organizations who might not have collaborated and to spread information to a wider network. The takeaway here is that higher educations can use their authority to bring others together and to foster community partnership, either directly with the institution itself or between other organizations. A couple of things to think about are, do you have any connections or partnerships with a college that you could build upon by connecting with other partners in their network? Or are there any colleges convening conversations or holding events that you or your organization should participate in? And with that, I will stop sharing my screen. And Josey, you should be able to share your screen. Let me know if you can't. Josey, it looks like you're muted. All right, one moment.
Testing, 1, 2. Can anybody hear me?
Now I can hear you. Are you able to share your screen?
Okay, so you can hear me. I'm not hearing you guys that well at this moment, but get this figured out, and then I will turn on the camera. Okay. Somebody say something so I can see if I'm good.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's really low, but we'll work with it. All right, we got to adjust the camera here. Thank you everyone for bearing with me. We've had some technical difficulties, but I think we'll be ready to go here in a minute. I've never used this webcam before, so I have to adjust it for my height and whatnot. Okay, can everybody see me well?
Yes.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for being here today. I'm very excited to do this strategic planning presentation. This is something I've done in the past, and it was a big part of my experience when I was pursuing my master's in public administration. So with that being said, let's go ahead and share my screen here. Okay, can you see that?
Yep.
Yes or no?
Yeah, we can see it.
You can see it? Okay, perfect. All right, so I'm going to encourage everyone to ask questions in the chat just because for some reason the video is going low, but we'll go ahead and try to get that fixed during the first breakout session. Let's go ahead and start here. Okay, so strategic planning, there's going to be a lot of things we cover today. And before I go into that, I'd just like to provide some qualifications as to why I'm suited to present today. So let's go ahead and that. My qualifications in the academic world are I have undergraduate degrees in history and political science. I do have a Master of Public Administration That was very helpful for me because at the same time as I was pursuing my degree, I was also the executive director of a nonprofit preschool. So I was very fortunate in the sense that I could apply all those topics, performance measurement, strategic planning, assessment, et cetera, to my work that I was directly doing. So it really gave me an excellent hands-on opportunity to really just get this material and in a way where I could share it with others. I am a PhD student at the Phyllis Washington School here at UM. I'm in my hopefully last year and a half here, depending on how things go. My dissertation is specifically focused on student hunger on college campuses. This is something that a lot of people don't think about. While I was reviewing the literature, the number I came up with is 40%. That's how many students experience some form of food insecurity while they're in college. That's a big number. A lot of people wouldn't think about that. I know I certainly did it. And I only began to think about this when through Montana Campus Compact, set up a food pantry on campus. I thought that was a brilliant idea, and I really wanted to know how big of a difference that made. So that's what I'm doing right now. And so in this program, I've learned a lot about research and really how to find the most important things to apply practically to a situation. Now, professionally speaking, I really got my start as director of the Mother Goose Child Development Center. It was a preschool designed for kids ages, well, it also had a daycare aspect to it, so ages 1 to 5. And really our main focus was to get these kids as ready for school as possible when they started kindergarten. We were rated the top preschool in the area to do that. At a certain point, our main goal objective was to get successful enough for the YMCA to buy us and make us their third preschool, which did end up happening, but as a result put me out of work because, and I knew ahead of time, they bring in their own people. So I was on the shelf for about 6 weeks before the Boys and Girls Club of Missoula County came knocking and offered me the opportunity to be their first ever director of development. So I got to learn a lot about grant writing, how to solicit contributions, how to get sponsors, really just how to keep your organization financially healthy. And from there, I was able to apply that in a number of roles, such as being the director of the area for Missoula and the Bitterroot for Special Olympics Montana. And that also opened the door for me to be able to contribute here at Montana Campus Compact. I provide administrative support and other support, such as this presentation today. Just no job too small wherever I'm needed. And most recently, I've been hired by Yale University as a grant specialist. I'm working on a 6-month contract, particularly on a grant that would increase access to healthcare for thousands of low-income, undocumented Hispanics, Latinos, and other marginalized groups. So I'm really excited to be doing all this, and I have over 10 years of experience working at nonprofits. So I definitely have a lot of experience, and I hope something I offer today can help you in your situation. So the purpose of today is a good strategic plan is a building block. It's not the answer to everything, but it does set up the next steps. Which direction should you be going in order to put together a plan that will help your organization move in the right direction? It requires certainly for the organization to really do some self-reflection and examine who they are and where they want to go. Strategic planning is a discipline. It was put together by years of experience and experts in research, but in a nutshell, it is defined as an effort to produce decisions and actions that guide and shape what the organization is, what it does, and the most important part, why it does it. In every single part of whatever you're doing, whether it's strategic planning, assessment, whatever, you should always be asking the question, why? Because if you don't know the answer to that, none of these plans are going to work. The why should be the most important thing. So today we're going to cover the following: what strategic planning is, and more importantly, what it is not. What are some elements that you commonly find in strategic plans? What are some of the most popular frameworks that strategic planning processes have used lately? What is VMOSA? Why is strategic planning important? Again, why? You should always know why. This is a fully interactive session. Please participate. You're not going to learn from me talking to you. We're going to learn the best. It's been my experience in the past doing this when we all work together ask questions, really help each other out in the breakouts and get to know each other and just learn from one another. That's what's worked for me in the PhD program, and that's what has worked in previous times that I've given this presentation. Okay, so we have some good news and bad news here. The bad news is you will not learn everything about strategic planning today. It's a very complicated process. And for that reason, that's why strategic planning is broken up into 2 sessions. And you still won't learn everything at the end of that. But the point of all this is to acquaint you with the process, so you at least know what it should look like, how it should start, what you should look for, and what you need to build upon. My recommendation is, after you complete this, if strategic planning is a process that you see yourself engaging in, I would seek out ongoing continuing education about it. And the most helpful thing you can do is, when you start a strategic planning process, to recruit stakeholders and experts who have done this before. The hardest thing you could do in a strategic plan is gather everyone in a room, and no one has done this before. You're almost setting yourself up for failure there. Now, when you bring in an expert, you don't want to lean on them as the say-all, end-all, but you do want to bring them in for their experience and apply it specifically to your situation. So you should become an expert in this process by learning from other experts. You won't just look to the expert to answer every question. Good news, you will not learn everything about strategic planning today. The discipline offers frameworks and best practices, but your organization is unique and one of a kind. Doesn't matter if you do the same thing as another organization, you still have unique proprietary aspects, and therefore you have the creative control and freedom to design a strategic plan and even a process that is unique for you and your challenges and what you need to address. So for me, one of my favorite things is when in a process you have creative control and freedom, which is something that a good strategic planning process should absolutely have. So, and in doing so, having a solid plan also gives you the ability to change, and this will happen. When things go wrong, things go sideways, having the ability to pivot instead of continuing on a plan that is just simply not working. And this gives you the ability to do that in a more agile manner. I'm sure all of us have been in an organization where to make any kind of change, it's painfully brutal and almost unrealistic. So a good process eliminates all of that thought and should be very easy to move around. Some of the things to consider. Communication is as important as the why, and it plays a critical role in the process. Everyone involved in the process should know what's going on. They should have the freedom to contribute to what's going on. In fact, they should be encouraged to contribute to what's going on. That feeds into collaboration, which is one of the most important parts, open dialogue and idea formulation. Some of the best ideas I ever had didn't come from me, but people I worked with. And so the more people you have involved in this, the better off you're going to be. Increasing the size of your stakeholders. I know that there are some thoughts out there that it's easier to get things done if you have a small group, making these decisions. Why that's wrong is, almost every time I've seen that done, it doesn't work because you don't have everyone buying in. You come to either your other employees or your community or whatever, and you say, this is what we've come up with, without being properly informed about all these other things you may not be thinking about. Like when I gave you that number about my study and the dissertation on college campuses, I talked to a couple of professionals about it. One day I heard something I'll never forget. I talked to a certain someone about this, a person who had 20 years of experience in higher education and a chair of their respective department. And the answer I got when I gave this idea was, do you really think hunger is a problem on college campuses? I see so many nice cars. Now, I thought this person was messing with me, but they weren't. They were dead serious. And so my response to that was, maybe it's not so much about the cars you see, but the ones you don't see, because people don't have them. And so I mentioned that because in this process, the more stakeholders you have, the more people in this process, the more things that are going to be pulled in that maybe you don't even realize are issues. And another key part is that a strategic plan organizes accountability and responsibility. So when you're taking on a big plan and person A says, I'm going to do this, person B says, I'm going to do this. You can organize it. You can have your whatever governing document and say, okay, this is all the different things we're going to work on separately and then bring it together. And being accountable for that. The plan should be inclusive, accessible, and equitable. So that feeds back into what I was talking about with stakeholders. The more you have, the better. And stakeholders are even very more useful when they come from the community. They don't have to work in your organization. They don't necessarily have to have strategic planning experience. Sometimes the best experience can be just from being from your own community and able to communicate some of the problems that may not be as easily seen or heard. Some common barriers to access that should be considered in a strategic plan are what language is in. I just spoke earlier about a grant that benefits Hispanic communities. So putting together a plan that's purely in English is probably not going to be that helpful. Knowledge. Again, that's why you bring in experts from different things and people from the community so that you can have the knowledge needed to put together a good plan. Time. You can't rush a strategic plan. It needs to have enough time to be properly put together. It needs room to breathe. There's no common time for how long it should take to put together a strategic plan, and it should most certainly not be rushed. Funding restrictions, and I think everyone deals with this. It's like, where do we find the funding to set aside the time to do strategic planning? It's a huge challenge, and there's no one common answer for that, but it certainly should be considered when you're trying to make your plan inclusive and equitable. Capacity, that's a key thing you want to go through. Physical space, if this is a plan that requires the use of physical space, knowing, engaging, and how useful that space is. If there's considerations for whether you need less space or more space. I'm sure everyone has heard the term before, location, location, location. Location is a key part to access. If something is out of the way, lower income or groups that don't have access to this, whether they're busy with jobs or children or whatever, they're not going to be able to access whatever services you're trying to provide if the location is not suitable. Having the appropriate technology. I talked about that with CE, but even strategic planning, whether it's spreadsheets, Google Docs, proprietary software, or anything like that, having the proper technology to manage your process is absolutely critical and definitely worthwhile setting funding for. Communication channels. We've talked about this before. We'll continue talking about this for the rest of this discussion, but having formal communication channels. Communication is not enough just to say, oh, hey, Bob, how is this going? Or Gina, how is this part of the thing that we delegated to you going? There needs to be an ongoing flow of communication about all these things between all these people. And how you do that is definitely very specific to what works in your situation. And attitudes. We'll talk about this later with change management, but attitudes are important. And that's why you want to bring as many people into this process as possible. Because if you don't have buy-in, you're going to have a lot of people with bad attitudes. And bad attitudes are not going to bring you to the finish line. So knowing how to get as many people involved and knowing how to manage these changes in a way that will benefit the most buy-in is absolutely critical, because you need a good attitude toward this process or it simply will not succeed. So let's talk a minute about leadership. A good leader, and when I say leader, I don't mean one singular person, but a leadership team or a leadership group, identifies and addresses common barriers to access, as we discussed in the previous slide. Leadership also provides a safe, efficient, and effective environment to promote the success of all stakeholders. So, doing what you can to make sure that you're facilitating a group that feels comfortable coming forward with maybe controversial ideas or maybe critiques that some may be sensitive to. Certainly, as I spoke earlier, not just collaborating between professionals, but families and community to really understand everything in a nutshell that may be an issue. And, always acting with integrity, fairness, and an ethical manner. To some people, you might think that seems pretty obvious, but it's not so black and white. There's a lot of gray situations where, it may be tempting to not act with integrity, fairness, or an ethical manner. So reminding yourself and your stakeholders that this is key to success, and doing that often is so necessary.
Josie, it looks like you have
So
some discussion and questions in the chat.
I'm pretty proud of this. This is my own approach. I came up with this. I call it the Knights of the Round Table approach. And what I love about this approach is,
Excuse me,
with the
Josey.
Knights of the Round Table, there was not
Josey.
okay.
May I?
There was not any one singular leader. They were all the leader. So they all worked together to achieve their goals. And I have loved that as a great picture of what strategic planning should be. There shouldn't be one singular point person. Everyone should feel equally involved and invested in this process, and should feel that they have the same ownership in the process as everyone else. Now, I see we do have a couple of questions here. I apologize. I just want to get through that note before I started tackling them. All right. So, yes, absolutely. One of the things, especially coming out of the pandemic, lockdown areas, no hybrid virtual option, lack of follow-up on information and resources covered. So that's where that technology piece is really important. Keeping that in mind and using this as a potential solution, maybe not the only solution, but part of it. As far as lack of follow-up on information and resources covered, that's where that communication and accountability piece comes in. If this is done in a formal way and followed on regularly, then this lack of follow-up on information and resources covered should not happen. Some of the barriers are time and attitudes. People engaged have little time. People who do are uninterested. And we talked about that earlier. Where do you find the time to put together a strategic plan if the budget is limited? That's a hard question. There's a lot of ways to attack that, but there's no one way that works best. Some people seek out grants. Some groups volunteer. That could be a hard ask, especially if someone's overextended. Finding ways to make this process interesting for those who do have the time. That's where that gathering buy-in approach is. And sometimes that can be handled as easily as including those people in the process, and then they do get interested. Sometimes it's not that simple, but certainly thinking about how to engage those who are disinterested, those are the people you want at the table the most. Thank you for that. Cliques in businesses and organizations, absolutely. I've seen that in tons of places, and it is a very hard thing to deal with. And if that clique is entirely a leadership team, that can be even harder to do. So being aware, and like I said, leadership should facilitate a space where you would be comfortable enough to address this topic. Maybe not as a singular opinion, but there should be some way to address cliques and how that should, be mitigated. And if it isn't, that's an issue that really needs to be explored and resolved. I'm glad you brought this up because, yeah, cliques can be the most toxic part of a strategic planning process. I'd like the idea of the clique to be everyone involved, and that should be, the goal, but that's easier said than done. We'll talk about some things today. We'll share from each other and maybe hopefully deal with that. Should we be going for quantity or quality when it comes to engaging in these project groups? Kind of. You want everyone at the table to obviously be a quality participant. But what does it mean to be a quality participant? Does that mean that someone has a certain amount of knowledge? Does that mean that someone is able to put in a certain amount of time, or something in between, something totally different? That I cautiously say quantity, because the more people you have at the table, the more opinions you're going to have and the better off you're going to be. Does that mean that you should bring in every Tom, Dick, and Harry, especially if they don't want to be there? No. But you should try at least to get people interested, to get them involved. And if that ends up being a big number, fantastic. I hope that answered the question. If it doesn't, we'll come back to it. And someone followed up, yes, quality is the goal, but both can be beneficial. Great minds, right? Dealing with some attitudes, okay, we'll talk about that. And I hope especially that this is mentioned in the breakout that we're about to go into. You missed my comments about the Knights of the Round Table. So very briefly visiting it again, in the Knights of the Round Table, there wasn't a singular leader. They were all the leader. And that's why there was a round table. There was no head of the table. They were all equally as much a leader as the next guy. And that's really what you want your strategic planning process and maybe your organization to potentially look like. If you can get this going, you are in a good place. You are in a very good place. Creation and engagement. Yes, that is a big part of getting buy-in. Encouraging others to create ideas or volunteer, things, and certainly not just encouraging that engagement, but setting an example by being very engaged as well. We have had some great comments so far. Thank you everyone for what you've contributed. So strategic planning comes in a couple of phases. Phase one is planning. Initial planning focuses on those steps required for succeeding. So thinking about it, saying, okay, what is our timeline? What should this look like as far as putting together the plan? So not necessarily just making the plan, but planning for the strategic planning process. All the roles we described and implemented before, you want as many people involved as possible, whether they're a leader or, just an active worker or someone in the community. Everyone should have a role and function that'll encourage buy-in. And really, as I kind of hit on indirectly earlier, at its core, strategic planning is about focusing on what actions would be the best fit between an organization and its environment in order to serve the goal or the mission of the organization. Now, every organization should have a purpose statement, and a good purpose statement mirrors the values and offers direction in strategic planning. Okay, so we're just going to watch a brief clip here from an expert who talks about the planning cycle in terms of vision, mission, and values.
Josie, I think we're having some issues with the sound coming in on our end.
Okay, hold on. Let's see here. Little technical difficulties, bear with me here. You know what? We'll move past this for now and go straight into the breakout. So we're going to do a little self-reflection here on Maggie, if you would, just break them up into groups. And this is what I'd like you guys to think about and discuss. Think about a time, if you have participated in strategic planning, what in your experience worked and what did not work? Obviously, you don't know everything about strategic planning at this point. So just what do you feel worked and what do you feel did not work? What advice would you give to someone who hasn't done this before? And then I'm interested to see what takeaways you guys have from your experience. So Maggie's going to go ahead and break you up into groups, and we're going to head and go take 10 minutes with this. So let's say 11:40, we'll come back and we'll briefly talk about what was discussed in the breakout groups. On group feels the effects of burnout. Okay, so there's two big things there. Yes, separating one from their role as their role in the organization versus their role in the strategic planning team can be difficult. If you're a leader in this boat, think about that. If you aren't, be aware of this and How you deal with that absolutely is going to be a byproduct of the leadership of your organization. So if you have a good organizational culture, you'll be able to address this. If you don't, then you have to figure out how to address it. We'll go over some ideas today, but there is no one size fits all to this. I hope that's the biggest takeaway that you take today. Always know the why, and there is no one size fits all. One group was comprised of Vista and Vista leaders, so there was not much experience with strategic planning, more project outlining and implementation. So for you, that will be especially valued, just the discussion we're having here today and the things you're learning from others who may have done it. Maybe in that group, there wasn't that much experience, but we will have other breakouts and you'll have the opportunity to network with others and hopefully get something out of that. Thank you all for contributing with fantastic comments. So now we're going to talk about mission, vision, and values. What is VMOSA? So as discussed in the previous video, which we're going to skip over for the moment because I pretty much tackled all of it, vision, mission, objectives, strategies, and action plans is a practical planning process that's used most for community groups to define a vision and really find those practical ways to enact change. So this is the opportunity absolutely to think about, okay, maybe we don't have that much experience in putting this together. Who can we bring in or what can we get ourselves involved in that will help us with this? It's very much like what you're doing today. It also helps you organize all this. You need benchmarks. If you put together a 1-3 year strategic plan, how do you know if it's working if you don't set up short-term goals to see if you're on track? Every private business, for the most part, has metrics. Most government institutions have metrics, and a large majority of nonprofits will set up these benchmarks, these short-term goals, and that's kind of their way of keeping track of what's going on. Now, like I said, this is absolutely crucial because in order to know where you're going, you have to know where you've been, and this is one way of knowing that. So, and who hit on this? Yeah, it was Aphias. I'm so sorry if I butchered that, but strategic planning should be the same as strategic values. So strategic planning should represent shared values and vision. So this value and vision shouldn't come from a small group of elected leaders or top management or things like that. This should be something that comes from everyone involved in the organization, not just those working there, but the community, funders, regulators, all of this. Focus areas. So a strategic plan will also put into focus the core purpose of the organization. In other words, why? I'm going to keep saying that. Why are we doing anything? Anytime an organization takes a step, you should ask the question, why, no matter how big or small. And this is especially important of all the stakeholder groups I mentioned before, not just the board, the administrators or the staff, but the community. They're going to know a lot better about what the needs are and how to approach them, or at least have a good foundation of experience on how to put this together that simply you couldn't have as a board administrator or staff member. You're looking at things from a different lens than maybe someone in the community who's receiving these services or benefiting from them or monitoring them or is affected in any other way. So, it really takes a village when it comes to this sort of thing. Creating a vision statement. If that doesn't exist yet, it absolutely needs to happen. If it does exist, it needs to be looked at, especially if you're engaging on a strategic plan anytime soon. And 100% correct, that vision statement should represent the values and vision of the organization as well as the mission. And as is going to be hammered on over and over, all the stakeholders should be involved in the process. So how do we craft a vision statement? You communicate the vision, you focus on specific elements. So elements could be, what are we trying to do? Looking at the mission and saying, okay, this is our mission. What about our vision can help fulfill this mission? Ethics came into this earlier, but this has to be revisited. Being trustworthy and trusting others. So acting in ethical ways, being transparent, holding yourself accountable, and setting by example is absolutely crucial, whether you're the top of your organization or you're a Vista or anywhere in between. If the trust doesn't exist, this won't work. It simply won't work. If you don't trust others, this will not work. This is an all hands on board sort of situation. And it is so crucial to be able to trust one another to work on these things, or it just won't get done or not get done well. Helping make decisions and solve problems. See, this is, again, you don't want these things coming from the top down. This should be a lateral thing done by shared vision. So when everyone's involved in sharing the ideas and the leadership and approaches to a problem, that's where you're going to get the best possible ideas and craft the best possible solution. And everyone should know what the vision is. And if that's not the case, then that should be communicated. And like, again, this is not something that should be from the top down, but if this came across laterally and certain stakeholders or people involved don't understand the vision, that means you need to go back and change that vision. It needs to be crafted in a way that everyone knows and understands. Okay, what we will do is watch this clip about mission, vision, and values.
My name is George Weiner. I'm the chief whaler of Whole Whale, and welcome to another episode of Whole Whale TV. Today, mission statements and vision statements. They're two different things, but oftentimes, sometimes, many times, they are confused. So we're just going to quickly dive into them. To begin, why we're talking about this actually starts with why. Simon Sinek, in his book, Start With Why, talks about the golden circle. And in this idea, we have the circle in the center where we start is why. Why do we do what we do? What is the purpose? And that's the driving factor. All too often, we start off with the what we're doing, which is the outer circle. So it is the why, the how, and then, you guessed it, the what, as you can see in the circle, with regard to mission statement and vision statement. The vision statement and our beliefs happen at the core of why we do what we do. And so it is a broader, more inspirational idea that is at the core that you then build around toward the outside. And we'll be framing it in this way as we define how we differ when we write one versus the other. The other thought leader I like to look at is Jim Collins, so famously written Good to Great, but also a book prior to that called Beyond Entrepreneurship, in which he defines the different layers of vision statements and mission statements. And the same idea of having the larger vision, something that's going to last for 100 years, the sort of mountain, the rock, the thing that is your reason for being. Then the mission statement, something that we are targeting. So we're going to layer these out, and then we're going to show you some definitions of them. To start with, I know words are funny things, and we can actually use google.com/trends to look at mission statement versus vision statement versus these other statements that are commonly used. More often than not, we're using and overusing mission statement. You should begin with the values, then the vision, then the mission, purpose, objectives, and KPIs. Lots of ideas here, I know, jargony. However, when you're starting with the vision, that's the highest piece. That's the top part of our pyramid where we're talking more inspiration. It's a view of how the world should be as a result of your work. Very high-minded. It can stand, as I said, it can stand for like 100 years, as Jim Collins puts in his book Beyond Entrepreneurship. It's also important, by the way, that this is short. We're talking like one sentence. Can you do that, right? It has to be inspirational and memorable because your team is taking this as the core, right? The core of that golden circle that they are working forward into the future on. So that's the vision statement. Let me give you some examples though. For instance, Habitat for Humanity. Well, their statement is a world where everyone has a decent place to live. Okay, that's pretty darn clear. I get it, high-minded, visionary. Another one, Charity Water. Charity Water believes that we can end the water crisis in our lifetime by ensuring that every person on the planet has access to life's most basic need, clean drinking water. So again, it's something very high-minded. It's not saying in 10 years we're doing X, in 5 years we're doing Y. Very high, and in that in that realm. Another one, Teach for America. One day, all children in this nation will have the opportunity to attain an excellent education. And so in there, again, aspirational, these aren't like quotients, but high-minded, we're setting the tone, we're starting with why, and focusing on that idea. That's the confusion. When we get into mission, you have to think more tangibly because we're moving down. We're not the high-minded piece. This is something that could be in the realm of 1 to 5 years even. And it's fine to reset that or refine that as you hit these goals. You know, it's the fundamental purpose of the organization. That's what we're after. That defines it. It defines the activity and the goal done to reach the vision. See how we're beginning to move out from the why to the how we're doing what we're doing? It's an idea of what's wrong with the world, but also how we're going about fixing it in that methodology in doing that. Again, we're looking for something short, memorable summary of the goals and what we're trying to do, and layers and purpose. So sometimes that mission and purpose is there. What I would like to focus on here too is potentially a BHAG, a big, huge, ambitious goal that, you know, again, is going to take you some time to do. You know, 0 in terms of number of malaria, or reaching 10 million in terms of X or Y. You know, imagine it in military terms. And this is what gets you. Like, the missions are the smaller parts that win the war, but the larger vision may be to keep the country safe. So as you're telling your team to go out there in the field, it's not keep our country safe, it may be more specific. Hey, go take that mountain over there. So another example is for Whole Whale, our vision is to close the nonprofit knowledge gap in data and technology. Fairly broad. Now, when we refine that to our mission, well, we set this a few years back, and for us, it's by 2020. We want to become the recognized industry leader, reaching 5 million nonprofit or learning engagements. And so for that, we actually attached a number. I really like it when a mission attaches a number or a percentage or a way that you're trying to move the needle and what you're measuring, because then that.
There we go. So we're going to call that good there. He covered all the things that I wanted to cover. Maggie has posted the link to the full video if you're wanting to see that. So we'll go into a breakout in a minute, but I want to talk about this a little bit further before we do that. In a nutshell, as was mentioned, when mission and vision are two entirely different things. And very briefly, I'll tell you that example about the charity water organization is amazing. It all began with a nightclub entrepreneur, very wealthy, very successful. And one day he woke up and he said, what am I doing with my life? I'm not helping people. I'm successful, but I don't feel like I'm successful, that sort of thing. So he decided he wanted to help people, and he started thinking about it. And then he started thinking about the water crisis in several parts of Africa. And that's when he came up with Charity Water. So he founded the organization with millions of dollars of his own money. And then he was able to bring in a lot of people from that same world who were trying to address the same problem. And they put together a fantastic strategic plan. It is pretty much the gold standard for strategic planning. And the reason for that, why it was such a good plan, is because it clearly laid out the what, the why, the mission versus the vision, and how to get there. And it's the gold standard because in doing so, yes, you didn't even hear the name of the guy who started Charity Water. That's the whole point right there. He's not doing it for the credit or anything like that. He's doing it because he wants to help others. When you have that kind of an attitude, people are going to invest a little bit of trust in you. And they're going to trust that if you bring them in, it's because you truly value them in the process. So somebody hit on, how do you develop an environment of trust? It begins with zeal for what you're doing. It also begins with acting trustworthy. You know, people can sense when they're being lied to or not being completely spoken to honestly, or any other number of things. Stakeholders don't value shortcuts. Stakeholders don't value when some people are doing the work and the others aren't. And then one thing that was hit on in this video that we didn't discuss fully is KPIs, another word for benchmarks. How do you know where you get if you don't know where you're going? And that is going to speak into agile leadership and change management. I talked about this earlier. Expect the unexpected, because no strategic plan in the history of the world has ever gone according to plan, not even charity water. So change management is a big part of that. Rarely is change comfortable when trying to improve upon the status quo. Like, for example, how do you develop an environment of trust where it may not exist? How do you break up cliques? How do you get cliques from engaging with the greater group as a whole? It's not comfortable to do these things. Nobody likes change. People like things the way they are, even if the suggested changes could improve the situation. There are concerns as accountability, burnout, funding, you name it. But as I said at the beginning, never ever has a strategic plan gone according as planned. So making changes and tweaks not only are inevitable, but you should welcome that. Change management is the most important part of the strategic plan in that it gives you the flexibility to pivot when things go sideways. Change management is hands down the most difficult part of strategic planning for the reasons I mentioned. Nobody likes change. Change makes a lot of people feel uncomfortable, you name it. And so for doing so, it requires consistency and a sense of urgency. So what does that mean? There should be a reason for managing the change. In other words, there should be a why to it. Even within the plan itself, in change management, should always be asking why. And so it was mentioned earlier, how do you develop an environment of trust, consistency, and a sense of urgency? That almost ties into that part about having zeal for the project, like being able to invest in saying, this is important. This grant will give access to healthcare for thousands of low income and undocumented Hispanics and Latinos. That's the sense of urgency. As of right now, they're not getting the care they need and their health is suffering as a result. Their work suffers, the places they work for suffer, their families suffer, they suffer. That's the sense of urgency. And that's what you should be looking at when working with your organization's strategic planning process. Here's a couple of examples of setbacks and adversity organizations face. Something happens you didn't plan for. I'll give you an example. When I was working for the Boys and Girls Club in Missoula County, one year, the United Way just decided, nope, we're not funding you. They had funded Boys and Girls Club for at least a decade before, if not more. But that year, they just unexpectedly said, we're not funding you this year. That definitely played a role in the ongoing operations of the Boys and Girls Club. And therefore, that strategic plan needed to be tweaked. Oh my God, we don't have this funding. How do we still achieve our goals with what we have? So that's one example of a budget cut. Or you have these targets for the year and you don't meet them. You know, that can really sink a ship, but that doesn't have to. A negative news story, one of the best things I ever heard is, you have to go find positive press. Negative press finds you. So yes, that's a double whammy there. Not only do you want to be acting in an ethical and trustworthy way that kind of keeps the negative news stories away, but even if you are, there could be a controversial project that makes the news and it sets back what the organization is trying to do because it creates unnecessary or unplanned pushback. So being aware that these are some setbacks that do occur and being prepared for how to tackle that is important. Then there's adversity, ongoing favorable conditions like a negative workplace culture, persistent budget shortfalls, community political resistance, controversial ideas, and hostile press or community leaders. Sometimes some organizations, for reasons that are either explained or not explained, get just harassed by local press or an organization that puts out publications, and being able to continue on the mission and vision in spite of these hurdles is, it's the reality and it's difficult. So coming up with ways to deal with that, but really what you want to do is be aware that setbacks and adversity happen. That's the big takeaway, and just trying to foresee what could go wrong and having plans for that. Again, there will be things that go wrong that you could not plan for, but you can try to plan for as much as possible. So somebody asked earlier, mentioned some ideas about how to deal with these setbacks and adversity. Number one, remain calm. I said this before, I'll say it again. Whether you're at the top of your organization or, you know, a new Vista or somewhere in between, you have to lead by example. And the biggest part of that is remaining calm. If you project anger or nervousness or lack of, let's say, support or, you know, faith in the plan, people can sense that. And then that's going to mess, you know, with the overall process for that reason. Again, I'll hit the Knights of the Round Table approach. Everyone can and should be treated as a leader in this process. And the best way to do that is to give and communicate responsibilities and valuing the successes and applauding the work while remaining calm and showing empathy and support for when the goals or the accountability isn't there. And to take immediate action to show on the program, to show that you are working on the problem. That again is leading by example. If something happens and you fall apart, you're like, oh my God, what are we going to do now? Strategic plan is going to suffer. In the case of the Boys and Girls Club, we looked at the situation, we go, oh my God, that's devastating. But you know what? That means I have to go out there and find a bunch more donors to close that gap. Doesn't mean we're just going to sit on our hands and deal with it or try to create a budget with way less money than we normally do and have the kids' program suffer. No, we're going to figure out where can we go, who can support us, that'll help soften this blow. And remaining calm and going to do that is what it takes. You know, I heard this is like, all right, I'm getting to work on this. We'll figure it out. That's immediate action. And again, creating that sense of urgency. Before I go more into this, we have a question in the chat. Responding to a setback is the name of the game in nonprofits, 100%, Ethan. When it comes to responding, the first thing you to do is ask how I can help. Absolutely. Or, yeah, you can say, how can I help? Or what can I do to help? Instead of saying, what can I do? That change in words is like, can I help? Or what specifically should I be doing to help? There's a difference there. The semantics are important. Thanks, Ethan. So creating a sense of urgency, whether it's a 1 year, a 3 year, a 5 year plan, why does this need to happen? What will happen if we don't do this? How will the community or the program suffer? Why this needs to happen now versus later. Very key. And you're talking about how to get people involved. Feedback, as we've talked about numerous times in this presentation, fosters buy-in. If you want people to be involved, you need to give them the power and the trust to be involved. You need to share the leadership. You need to give them the leadership needed to buy in and to be involved in a way that makes it feel like what they're doing matters, like why they're doing what they're doing matters. And, overall ownership of the project. That's how you want everyone to feel. You want all those nights to feel like they're sitting at a round table. And generating short-term wins. So not only do you want to set benchmarks, but when you hit those small benchmarks, celebrate it. Go, oh, we did this. Fantastic. Thanks, team. We're on our way. This can work both ways too. Let's say it's not a short-term win. This was a KPI and fell short. You could still celebrate that. You could say, we almost got it. We got to tweak a couple of things, but good job, team. We're on our way. But celebrating those short-term wins is absolutely necessary. Otherwise, you're going to get people burning out faster. You're going to get people losing faith in the plan. Morale's going to suffer. And when that happens, you've lost already. I'm going to give you a real-world example. For those of you who have been to one of these sessions before and have heard this, forgive me, but I think there's something here for those who haven't. So my first management job in a nonprofit world was working for a nonprofit preschool called the Mother Goose Child Development Center. I came to this organization when I graduated. There wasn't a lot of employment opportunities in Missoula. And I had worked so hard getting a degree. I was really holding out for a bigger role. But it was taking a while. So my girlfriend at the time said, there's this part-time job open at this nonprofit preschool I work at. Maybe you do that for a few months until you find what you're looking for. I sucked it up and I did it. So I went and started working for this organization as a part-time preschool teacher's aide. And through a series of fortunate events, 6 months later, I was elevated to director of the organization. And, the first thing I had to deal with was the workplace culture was rock bottom. I mean, it was a hostile place to work, which is so bad when this is a place that deals with children. So the first thing that needed to happen was addressing that. So the most effective way I found to do that was to ask the board of directors for a little bit of funding so that we could do strategic planning on Saturdays. And so everyone was invited to come to this thing on Saturdays, but no one was mandated to be there. They were told if they came, they would be paid for their time. And that's all a lot of people need to hear to get involved. So we started identifying issues and talking about how we could address them and all that. And over time, this will take forever to describe, but over time, we were able to get there. Was it a perfect environment? No, but you wouldn't even recognize the place from where it was before. So the workplace culture improved, but the one thing that was still an ongoing problem was funding. Childcare is very expensive. And even, with considerable tuition, there's still budget shortfalls. What the organization had wanted for the longest time and couldn't do was apply for a USDA grant that would more than enough cover that gap and be able to provide the children with extremely healthy meals every day. Problem was, to qualify for that USDA grant, you needed 85% of the parents enrolled to provide their financial information. And frankly, the parents did not trust the previous administration. Again, how trust comes into play. So they could never apply for the grant. So I turned this around as an opportunity, and I met with every set of parents individually. We're talking about 85 sets of parents. So it took a while, but I met with them all individually. And I explained why this grant is important. If we can get this grant, we can feed your kid the best food possible every day. We'll have enough money to make sure that our program is even better than it was before, as good as it was. But in order to get there, we really need you to fill out these forms. Now, what I can do for you is I can promise you that all this information will be stored in a locked cabinet, and that the only person who will ever see this information is me and the USDA. Took some selling in some situations, but guess what? We were able to get over 90% of the parents to provide their financial information, and we got that grant. It's because of the trust and because of the time invested. Instead of treating the parents like they weren't important and having a group meeting saying, hey, we need this information for a USDA grant. No, each person was treated like a knight at the round table. We want this preschool to be better. We want the menu to be healthier. We want a stronger educational program. Can you help us? And this is what I can do to make sure that your concerns are mitigated. That's what it takes. That's one real world example. And that wasn't a miraculous situation. It's just what it took was establishing trust, communicating the why, communication, and just being consistent. So we will go into one last breakout before we end, but just some of the key takeaways before we go into it is communication, accountability, and I've left this out a couple of times, but collaboration. Every time I say bring somebody in, I'm talking about collaboration. Every time I tell you to go talk to someone, I'm talking about collaboration. A strategic plan is not a holy document. While it can be looked at as the gospel, it can only take you so far. And therefore, you need to be prepared for the setbacks and adversity that will determine your success. And when those things come, how to deal with them. And again, there will be things that you cannot see coming, but at least knowing to remain calm and how to address the situation will get you where you need to be. The vision, mission, and values of your organization should be clear or made clear before embarking on a strategic plan. If you don't know what that is, that's where you need to start. So I discussed before, change is, I say often uncomfortable, change is always uncomfortable. So leaders that abide by best practices will support stakeholders by practicing change management. Instead of going down with the ship on a strategic plan that isn't working, what you want to do is look at it and go, okay, this is not working. What can we do? You know, we did this part right, but we're having issues in this part. What can we do to get back on track? And it was mentioned before, endurance, burnout. You know, someone's been working hard, working long hours, and you're asking them to participate in a strategic planning process. It requires endurance, even if they're not, you know, working above 40 hours, whatever. Endurance is necessary, and especially leading that by example, because I'm sure when you participate in this strategic planning process, you too will be tired. And so you need to exhibit and build that endurance. And that kind of stuff is contagious. So if it's tough, but you're still hanging in there and you're showing that zeal, that others will pick up on that and they will reciprocate in the same way. Okay, we're going to go into our last breakout here. And that breakout is mission, vision, and values. Do you know the mission, vision, and values of your organization? I've not checked their websites. Does your organization have the components we've discussed? Based on your experience and what we've discussed today, does your organization live out the missions, visions, and values that it states it does? And if not, what obstacles can you identify that keeps your nonprofit from achieving organizational excellence? We've heard some things like clicks. We've heard some things like burnout. What else? So, okay, so Maggie's going to break you up into groups, and then we'll get back here. I don't think we're going to be able to take 10 minutes. We'll take 5 minutes to chat, and then we'll come back.
We do only have 2 minutes left before the session ends. So Josey, would it be okay if we did a chat share for this instead of doing breakout rooms and then coming back?
Absolutely. So yes, we only have a couple minutes. So I will put my information here and answer any final questions or thoughts you may have. And you also have Maggie's information here too, if you have any questions. But in a nutshell, this is how you want to do your strategic plan. It should be cyclical in nature. Assess the issue, engage your stakeholders, involve them, put together the plan, perform the plan, and evaluate the plan. And if it's not working, reassess the situation and do it all over. That's my final 2 cents. And I'll answer a couple questions quickly here. How much urgency is too much urgency? There's no such thing as too much urgency. The higher the sense of urgency, the better off you're going to be. Again, remaining calm should prevent rash decisions, and creating a sense of urgency shouldn't burn out people. There are ways to do that without creating a sense of burnout, and thinking about that is important. As far as those nonprofits observing disheartening things on a regular basis, again, that's where you need to remain calm and show that sense of urgency. So housing and food insecurity, this is an urgent thing. People are hungry. People don't have a place to live. What can we do? Lori's telling us that UM Western has a mission, vision, and values, and that they followed most of them. So if you're looking for a good example, check out the UM Western website. It sounds like they have something good there. And I encourage you to reach out to Lori if you have any more questions or thoughts about that. But that's it for me today. Thank you for attending. This is my information here. Again, Maggie's the coordinator of CBI, so she handles most of the questions. But if you have anything specific about what I've said today, I'm more than happy to talk to you about it, share ideas, anything else. I'm very happy to be a resource. So again, thank you again for your time, and good luck in your strategic planning.
Thank you, everybody. Just as a reminder, the class 4 reflection should have gone out about 15 minutes ago. So far, you should have received 4 class reflections and 1 pre-survey that you must complete for the micro-credential. We can go over that a bit more this coming week, but thank you all for showing up today, and I'll see you again on Wednesday at this time at the Zoom link. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for your time, Dr. Diaz.